Hope everybody's having a good day. As always, these things are recorded, so these events, and if you miss some of it, you're more than welcome to go over to our YouTube channel and check out the video once it's posted. All right. I think let's say we could get started. Welcome everybody to another Remedy Discord event. My name is Jason, aka Thank You. I am a security researcher at Glider. At Remedy. I'm also a Glider contest triager. And today we're going to talk with right now the number one leader in the Glider contest, a Web3 security automator, ChaseTheLight. Welcome, Chase.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Glad for you to show up here. I I've always found your queries that you submit to be very, very interesting. I think you are one of the best Glider contributors we have so far. So I really want to sit down and sort of have this interview with you to really try to get a quick, a good understanding of how you think about Glider, how you use Glider. I think that's actually very important for many people. But before we do that, I just want to give you guys a quick update on the Glider contest. We're obviously getting a lot of contributions, and every single contribution is really great. Really happy with some of the stuff I'm seeing. I apologize if you guys are having to wait a little bit longer than expected, but we are going through every single submission. If so, let's say there's a contribution that hasn't been responded to in a couple of days, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and ping me about it. I'm more than happy to take a look at it as fast as I can, especially for contributions that have a delay in the response. Also, we are getting some duplicates now. So, my recommendation, if you are writing a query, is to contact me. You can contact me on Discord. You could DM me, and ask me if the query that you're thinking about writing has already been contributed. So you don't have to deal with submitting a duplicated query. And we've had a couple of guys reach out to us, which has been really great, asking about that. And I've been able to give pretty good clarification on it. If not, there's always just a risk of submitting a query that is duplicated. So you don't want that. It becomes an ultimate optimization query, and that's really great, but it also reduces the reward you guys get too. So just keep that in mind. It's currently going to run to December 31st. As long as you guys submit a query before December 31st, it's going to count for the contest. So you guys still have some time. And even if we have to continually work on feedback and edit the query after the contest, that's completely okay. You'll still be rewarded. So um, don't worry about that aspect. With that out of the way, Chase, can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. So generally speaking, I've been in the cybersecurity space for the last, I'd say 6, 7 years. Um, sorry, that 6, 7 years, 10 years. But yeah, like I in the Web3 space, I originally started as a manual auditor, and I was also very into essentially trading. I've mentioned this on on other podcasts as well, Bounty Hunters, where I would trade on Binance Smart Chain, these microcap tokens. And obviously, I wasn't that aware of, on how everything worked. I wasn't really sure what a. This was before I was even a manual auditor. So sometimes my money would just kind of vanish. So I was like wondering, hey, where did everything go? And I kind of looked into it. I learned about smart contracts, and I kind of learned how to read them and essentially spot rug pull contracts. And I was kind of performing the same process every single time I would buy a token. So then I decided to automate that, and that was kind of like the start of Light Chaser. And since then, I've become a Web3 security automator. And yeah, I'd say that's like a summary. version of my program.
Okay. I'm also somewhat familiar. You also have audit bots as well too, right? That's another thing you're working on. Is that
That's
correct?
right. That's right. I'd say the main thing I've worked on thus far is Light Chaser, which is my order board with 1,300 detectors. And also, I used to compete on Code Arena bot races as well. And
Hmm.
I currently supply Light Chaser to audit firms primarily.
Excellent, excellent. Um, what drew you into using Glider? Uh,
Yeah, so I knew about Glider beforehand, but with this particular contest, I was kind of just on X slash Twitter. And then I kind
mhm.
of just saw like the announcement. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I clicked it, and I have to be honest with you, your theming worked. It was like a really cool like gaming theming, and I kind of read up more about it, and the contest itself just looked like a lot of fun. And also me being a Web3 security automator who specializes in static analysis, and obviously Lightchaser is built in Python. It was right like down my alley, and I imagine it to be very similar to a move auditor finally coming across one of those really rare move contests. It was kind of like that for me. It's not every day that you get to see a static analysis contest. This is the second one I've ever seen in my ever since I started Web3 security. So
Oh
yeah,
wow.
it was no brainer.
Yeah, I sort of had that realization before I started work at Remedy. I worked on CodeQL. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that. And I like had submitted contributions to that, and then I got into Web3 security. And CodeQL doesn't really work for any Web3 stuff, but it's really focused on Web2 languages. And uh, it was a really beautiful moment when you had all this experience and you come across something like Glider, and it just everything just matched. Is like a light went off in my head. It was brilliant.
Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm always curious about this. What was the very first query that you wrote in Glider?
So my very first query was super simple. It was very much just a MVP because I just kind of wanted to quickly complete something and
Mhm.
essentially see what happens. It was a safe approve is deprecated detector. It was super simple. As you know, Open Zeppelin they've deprecated safe approve because some tokens they actually revert when you if the current approval is not zero, and obviously that caused a lot of issues. Like for example, a vulnerability which I saw in one of this might be interesting to one of you. One of you guys could make a detector for this. But if you have like a safe approve within a for loop or while loop, and it's like the same source and target, then the second iteration will fail because the approval will no longer be zero. So just that was my first detector. It was super simple and it was proof of concept really. But yeah,
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good query, I think,
yeah,
because it's so niche and there's not a lot of requirements for it, and it also just requires a little bit of specific knowledge in this case about like how that particular approval system works. And those are my favorite queries, I think, because they just don't take a lot of time and
yep,
you get pretty clear results pretty quickly.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anybody wants to, I'm not going to front run you. The steps you want to look at is essentially iteration, safe approval or approve, and same source and target, and there's no approval of zero within the iteration. That's essentially what you're looking at. So just as soon as this meeting is over, just quickly get that out, get it submitted before somebody else does. But yeah,
So I have a question. I think this is very it's I want to understand a little bit more about how you go from having that knowledge to translating it into a potential static code analysis query. Not necessarily how you write the glider query, but how do you take that idea, that knowledge, and transmit it into a an idea for a query?
yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as you know, I've worked on Light Chaser, and I have quite a few detectors under my belt, like 1,300. So the actual like process of seeing a vulnerability and then abstracting that into like an automation, it, because I've done it so many times, it does come kind of intuitively to me now. Purely That's purely experience based. As you use a glider more and more, the exact same thing will happen to you. You will kind of see a vulnerability, and instantly the scaffolding of the detector will instantly just pop into your mind. And I kind of noticed this too, because obviously when I first started using glider, I didn't know like how everything worked, and as I made more and more detectors. That same process which I had for Light Chaser, where the actual like scaffolding would just kind of pop into my head, it began to happen with Glider as well. And so this is something that I would just recommend that is very much experience based. Just keep on making them, and you would just kind of naturally just know how to automate different types of things. And in my opinion, there is no vulnerability that is not automatable. It's just really about how much time you're willing to spend on the detector.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I would also add to this too. If you're just starting out, I would be somewhat cautious of trying to write a very big query that does a lot of things and catches a lot of things. One, it's going to really, it's just going to take a lot of effort to do, and at the end of the day, you're just going to end up with one single query. I mean, maybe it's looking for a critical, and maybe there's a really high true positive rate for that query, and that's really great. But just in general, I think the smaller the query, the more fun you'll have, and the better you'll become, because you'll be writing multiple queries versus just one single query, and you start picking up on sort of gotchas and things you maybe are not aware of. I mean, I know personally I've written very big queries in the beginning that just really didn't pan out that well for me. And I've learned to sort of pull that back a little bit. Just one quick thing too is just for everybody who's submitting queries. We don't actually expect you to write a query that does a full end-to-end check. So if your query finds a very reasonable vulnerability that maybe requires a little bit of checking, in addition to what the glider query does, I mean, that's acceptable. And that's, I mean, admittingly, that's also a little bit of context of what the query is doing. But I just want to throw that out there because I don't want somebody to work on a very big query and then submit it and realize they could have done less work for that. Um, so if you were okay, let's say that you had to teach somebody glider, and they had like 6 weeks to learn glider, to use glider, not only to find bug bounties, but also for the contest and beyond. What would be your recommendations for that person?
Okay, so if you actually go through the documentation, you will see that like a lot of the stuff at the querying stage is pretty straightforward. Like for example, with name or with name regex, or instructions, internal calls. Uh, so once you've kind of like learned those basics, what I would do is I'll start making a huge variety of detectors. And in every single detector, I would try and use different techniques. For example, you have stuff like is tainted, oh, recursive DF forward, recursive DF backwards, and all these different techniques. Because essentially, what happens once you kind of like use all of these more niche glider functions, they kind of get added to like your mental toolkit. Because essentially, when I first started writing detectors, like for example, like, a lot of them were just very much like query heavy, and they weren't using like the full potential of glider. Like it wasn't really using those like niche kind of glider functions. It was very much like borderline like source code grepping and stuff like that. Obviously, none of my detectors now have source code grepping, so you kind of want to just like read the docs and learn those more deep functions, which is something which I've learned kind of like later on, because now I'm using like techniques like is tainted, has args, get recursive components, which is from the cheat sheet, mind you, and once you kind of like learn those things, then you will kind of realize that a lot of detectors which you kind of worked on, but then you kind of like threw away because you weren't really getting anywhere with them. If you actually go back to them later with all this new knowledge, you'll actually be able to like get them up and running. So I would say like once you learn the basics really quickly and then just start essentially just coming up with like any reasonable detector and try and force yourself to use those more niche functions, and then you will learn how they work, how they operate, when's a good time to use them, when's a bad time to use them, and that's essentially what I would do if I was starting from zero again.
Yeah. I think you mentioned is tainted, and that's a really great function that I don't see, I
Really
think,
powerful.
enough. Yeah. So if anybody's unfamiliar with is tainted, what it does is it checks if you have a value. Let's say you have a glider query and you end up with a value inside of instruction, and you want to see if that value came from, say, function input. You could just call is tainted, and it will return true if it's coming from the function argument, and it will return false if not. That's a really common vulnerability component, I would say, in many vulnerabilities. And it's just dead simple to use, and I think you could write a lot of queries with just as tainted if you sort of had the knowledge of the vulnerability that you're looking at. Um, yeah, interesting. Okay. So what is, I think for a lot of people who start out, they'll use AI, which is good and bad. I support using AI, but I have some issues with it. So you have, like, let's say either you wrote it or AI wrote it, and now you have some issues that pop up and some errors that are appearing when you're running the query. How do you typically debug your glider queries when an issue or error pops up?
So when the queries which I've written, I don't use AI to code them, and that one of the reasons is that again, this is just my personal opinion. I think that it makes it less likely that you, as a security researcher, will become very good at that particular framework, because you are kind of like delegating a lot of the thinking and work externally, essentially. So personally, again, this is just my opinion. I would advise against using it for building the detectors themselves, but using it for like research or like expanding on vulnerabilities and stuff like that, that's a completely separate thing. But for the actual coding element of it, I would do that by hand, and I think you will become a much better automator by doing so. But generally speaking, like if I do kind of like get a error or because with a detector which I've written, in my opinion, the best way to debug it is the debugging process that pretty much every programmer knows. The It's the best thing in the world. Print statements. Just throw print statements everywhere, and you will learn the like. You should be able to figure out what went wrong purely based on that. A lot of the times, like you get bugs with very simple stuff, like you running a function against a object type that function doesn't belong to. And obviously, if you just print the object out, you will actually see, okay, what object type is this? And then you could look at the docs, and then you could go through the docs and see, okay, what functions can I apply to this? A lot of it is really just that. I mean, that's my go-to method, just print statements, early returns, and early continues. These are the three main things which I use for debugging.
Yeah, highly. I think early returns is also underrated. A lot of people don't like. You guys could comment out part of your query and just look at the results of the initial portion of that query, and that could tell you a lot actually about, especially in cases where you don't get any results back and you're scratching your head like, did my query fail? Are there just no bugs? That's really great to do.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was
All things I do, by the way, that you
100%.
mentioned.
There was like
Yeah.
one bug I was working on. I apologize for cutting you off, but there was like one
No,
bug
go
which
ahead.
I was working for, and I couldn't really quite figure out what was going wrong with it. And I did the print statements and everything. And essentially, what I did to figure out what was going wrong was I just kind of put return true at different stages of the function, and then I just kind of used that to figure out when were the results just become nothing. It says no results found. And then I was able to find the particular function that wasn't working, and then I kind of worked on that, and I kind of realized that okay, sometimes this returns a instructions type, and sometimes it returns an API set, and then I was able to like make a I remodeled that function so that didn't happen anymore. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a debugging.
Excellent. Excellent. What do you see? Obviously, I'm sure you're focusing a lot on this contest and writing glider queries for that. But what do you see outside of this contest? How do you see glider being most useful for you?
So one of the like core strengths of Glider is its scale. Yeah, you can essentially scan every single verified contract on, for example, Ethereum mainnet or Blast or wherever it may be, and then you can actually like leverage that to do a lot of good. Like let's say there's an incident. You can kind of look at that incident and essentially write a query for it, and then use that to find other protocols which could be under threat, and then essentially just reach out to them and hopefully prevent the same thing happening to those protocols. I think that's a very good use case.
Yeah, I agree. I still haven't found another tool that is able to scan across all contracts on a chain. That's. I mean, it's really tough to do. We did it, and it's really nice that we built a static code analyzer to look at that. So I'm pretty happy with the tool. I'm glad that you also see the same benefits. Um, Obviously, you don't support AI. I think we sort of discussed that a little bit, or at least when it comes to this contest and wanting to actually learn glider. Um, what When writing glider queries, do you have any like tools or workflows or tricks that you use when you want to write a query?
Honestly, there is one thing which I began doing relatively recently. That I personally think that obviously I wasn't familiar. Like I haven't used Glider before this contest. So this could be super useful. I'll just quickly explain it now. It's more for workflow, not really a tool. I basically just
Mhm.
hand code and use docs. Pretty much that's it. But this is like a workflow which I'm currently using, and so far it's been very effective. I'm going to share the alpha now. So I have three main folders. There's some other subfolders as well, which I'll get into later. But I have three main folders. I have a experiment folder, I have a new detectors folder, and then I have a final touches folder. So the experiment folder is essentially me scouting what query slash detectors are worth pursuing further. And you can pretty much source vulnerability ideas from anywhere. There's like a complete ocean of vulnerabilities that can be automated. So
Yeah.
how as a researcher do you know, okay, which one of these should I pursue? In my opinion, you could kind of just like choose any. You could get them from articles, you can get them from postmortems, you could get them from vulnerability reports, you could get them from contest platforms, anywhere. And you essentially, the first thing which I do is I make a very, 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 very basic MVP detector. You can pretty much make this in like 10, 15 minutes. It's very simple. And then you kind of just like, you run it and you just kind of take a quick look at all the results, like most of the results. And if you kind of find that the initial blast radius of this, like quick MVP is really good, then okay, I have something here. And then you can then move it to the new detectors folder. And what I've kind of found is a tremendous amount of detectors never actually make it past this point. Because this is just my opinion. Obviously, I'm not like a triage or anything. This is just what I think. If you have built a detector, but that detector is only finding, let's say, one or two instances, unless those one or two instances are very high TVL, like lots of funds at risk kind of thing, in my opinion, it might not be worth you spending all that additional time to get that detector through the door. You might want to just kind of like put it on the back burner for now and work on different detectors. Because at the end of the day, this is a time boxed contest. So then once it gets to the second stage, that's when I kind of start building a more deep detector, like that kind of takes care of all the false positives. And I try and do different experiments, and I try to figure out, okay, how can I increase the blast rate? Are there any ways I can do? Can I generalize this further to increase the blast radius? Okay, how can I get rid of these false positives? And it's basically like the main part of the process. And essentially once I've submitted it, then I move it to final touches, and this is when I just kind of just go back and forth with the triage. Like they give me feedback, I implement the feedback, I send it back, and that's essentially where they go then. And I also have a fourth folder, which is the dead ends folders, with essentially where the failed experiments go, essentially. But again, do not delete them, and I'll tell you why in just a bit. So by having this process, I was kind of able to like really quickly find what detectors are essentially very good ideas for the contest, and it allows you to be far more time efficient. And in my opinion, it's so much fun because you get to build more and more detectors. So your skill also increases exponentially because you are
Mhm.
doing so many different experiments as well and using so many different techniques as well. But yeah, so the fourth folder is the dead ends folder. Do not delete them, is because essentially as you become what some of the detectors which I've recently submitted were actually dead end detectors. I count on using Glider. I count on making new experiments, submitting new detectors, and obviously I got better at the framework. So then when I opened up the dead ends folder, I was like, hey, hang on a second, I can try these with these new techniques which I just learned. And then when I tried them again, all of a sudden they're working great, and they actually are like submission worthy now. But yeah, that's my process. That's like docs and this 3-4 folder process. These are my main things. Pretty straightforward. I don't use any fancy tooling or anything like that.
That is a very similar process to what I experienced when I was learning glider. So I'm glad I'm not the only one who is using that. Really, it's really great. I really appreciate the part about, even though you have a failed query, you're willing to go back and modify it. I've had that experience a couple of times where there's a really complex thing I want to look for, and I just do such a poor job at the query, and it doesn't really work that well. It's very slow, and having that experience to come back to it and then rewrite it again is great. And then be able to find vulnerabilities with it. That's like the icing on the cake. Um, yeah, that's really good. I recommend you guys really don't be afraid to go back to old queries that maybe you don't think is that great after having some experience with uh, uh, using Glider. Quick question. BZ asks, how do you deal with memory errors?
Oh, again, so when you get a memory error, I'm telling you this from personal experience. 9 times out of 10, it's not actually a memory error. It's more of a exact cap error. So if you just reduce the exact cap, 9 times out of 10, it'll just start working. I think once this is just my hypothesis. I think if you hit your memory, I think there's like a RAM cap and there's also a time cap. If you hit either of those whilst it's like mid function, then it just exits early, and then you just get a memory error. So it's nothing on your part. It's just your exact cap is probably too high. That's really it.
Yeah, so that's 100% right. Certain functions do produce more memory too, and that's also an impact. But I would encourage you guys, don't, recursive is one of the biggest culprits for memory issues, or like just exceeding a lot of memory. But we really suggest you not to remove recursive because it's very crucial. Like I was triaging a query earlier that did not have recursive and is actually producing false positives. And then as soon as we added recursive functionality, it was able to catch those false positives, and we're just get more accurate results. So even though I understand memory errors are frustrating, just reduce your exec cap, and just be somewhat aware that it's not really an issue on your end. It's just the limitations that we've set on the system for users. And I mean, obviously, we want to always try to increase that, and hopefully, one day we'll get to a point where we can start increasing the cap for it. And we also have other tools and features that we're working on, I think, that you guys will really like, because it will sort of help you just get around with memory issues. But I'll stop there. BZ asks, what's a good exec cap?
Okay. Honestly, I just start with something small, like 100, and I keep on ramping it up until I start getting issues. Because a lot of the times, what happens is, like, let's say I start with 100, completely fine. Then I'll go up to 1,000, completely fine. Go to 10,000, completely fine. And then eventually, I'm just like, okay, I keep on increasing it. Okay, let me just do bigger jumps. And eventually, you find, oh, okay, I don't need an exec cap anymore. So just start small and just slowly kind of like ratchet up. Then you will kind of find the ceiling when you're just below the 10-minute time cap, and then you can stop there if you like. But my opinion is that during the experimental stages of your detector, keep your exec cap low because you want to do rapid iteration. So if you have a very high exec cap, then you're just wasting a lot of time, really.
Yeah, I would yes, and I don't know how often you use custom scope, Chase, but I do recommend just custom scope too, because with custom scope you could just upload your own contracts on Sepolia and test against the query against that. It doesn't test obviously all the contracts on chain, but it certainly gets you to a very good MVP, true positive, if you have an idea for a a query you want to write. V Escaper asks, when could we suggest new glider features during the contest? Anytime. Just reach out to us. We're more than happy to hear about what features you guys may want. I can't guarantee you that we would actually get anything done by the time the contest ends, but certainly we really appreciate any feedback you guys have, and take it and certainly we're taking anything you guys have into consideration. Mishoko asks, does Glider support querying for syncs, meeting points where different data flows converge, and phi nodes? I think that maybe that's a question maybe more for me. We do support syncs. So if you guys are not familiar with static code analysis, there's a concept in writing a query where you have a source and a sink. And a source could be something like a function input, and which is a user controls, and then a sink is a function, for example, a function that accepts that user input. And that's a very common design and static code analysis queries. I think many of you guys have source sink queries, and I won't go any further into that, but you could look it up and read more information about it. You don't need to know that terminology to write glider queries, I think, but just fun to look at. Was there something you wanted to add, Chase?
No, I think you answered that pretty well. Nothing to add.
Okay. Yeah. Meeting points. Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, what you could there's ways to identify meeting points. And if you have like particular questions about that, just send me your way, and we could kind of figure out how to write a glider query that does that. Phi nodes. I'm not too familiar with phi nodes, so if maybe you could explain a little bit more what that is, I could get back to you on that one. Okay, guys. Is there any other questions you have for Chase or for me? Is there any parting advice that you would give to any contributor, new or old, who is in the contest, or just not even necessarily wanting to write queries for the contest, but just writing queries in general, uh, for everyone, Chase?
Yeah. So when in my opinion, like, one really good thing about glider is that, like, it's one of those things that's it's easy to learn, and hard to master. So, like, if you are relatively like new to programming and you're not super familiar, don't be put off from competing. I actually do think that even if you are relatively new to programming, you can actually pick up glider pretty quickly. And then, like I mentioned previously in this talk, you can just kind of experiment with all the different niche functions, and then slowly over time, you'll become very familiar with it, and you'll be able to make more advanced detectors. Because I do kind of feel with a more niche contest such as this, some people might just feel a little bit like too overwhelmed to start participating. I don't think that's really the case with this contest. I actually do think that even like within a week, you can actually learn enough to actually start submitting approvable queries. So I think that like that's like the main advice, because I do think that there'll be some people in the audience who haven't submitted anything yet. 100% compete. It's fun. I'm having a lot of fun. So love to have you
Yeah,
as well.
fantastic. Yeah, and I think there's so many vulnerabilities out there that I know I said earlier we do get duplicates, but I think if you guys just want to spend a little bit of time on the ideas, you could certainly come up with very unique queries. I mean, just dozens and dozens if you want. Um, so yeah, great advice. Misoko asked, does Glider do symbolic execution for enriching the nodes and edges so that we could query them? Yeah, I mean, you could query anything with Glider. So you could get as detailed as you want with that sort of analysis that you're trying to do. Um, I, I'll refrain from discussing how it works like in detail, but we do like, I mean, we're compiling the solidity and we're creating nodes and edges for just everything that's within a solidity contract. So I don't think you should have any trouble with that. Harvesto, absolutely. Everybody, we are going through all the query submissions as best we can, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. If you're waiting on feedback. Misoko asked, does Glider support variable multiple reassignments as taints for X? If X is a variable tainted, then Y equals X, then Z. Yes, we do that. We have that in place. We have something called forward data flow or backward data flow if you want to go backwards. So you could identify that uh, uh, sort of approach. So I guess just a little bit backstory. Whenever you guys are dealing with solidity, you know that you can have a variable that's assigned to another variable, and then that other variable is used elsewhere. What's really nice about that is with Glider, you could search through all those variables, and that's a really neat feature, especially when you want to understand if a user could influence a particular value that is used somewhere else. BZ, sorry, I missed your question about the POC. Must I at all times write POC, even if the bug is pretty straightforward? We do ask you write a POC. I mean, you could keep the POC as simple as you want, as long as it shows the vulnerability. We do appreciate that. It helps us in cases where maybe you think the bug is straightforward, but maybe we don't. It's just a very nice thing to add, and we do appreciate it. So, but you could keep it as simple as you want. All right, guys. I don't think there's any more questions. As always, this is being recorded, so we'll be posting it on YouTube in the next couple of days. Chase, where can they find you?
Oh yeah. Feel free to follow me on Twitter/X. It's just ChaseTheLight 99.
Excellent. I know I'm following you, so if you guys aren't following him, please check him out. Chase is, I think, certainly one of the top, if not top, Web3 security automators in the space, without question. So that's it, guys. Thanks again for joining the Remedy Discord event. We'll have another one coming soon. So be on the lookout for that. As always, the contest is ongoing. Please submit your glider queries. If you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask in the channel. We get to them as soon as we can. And thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Thanks, Chase.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.
All right. See you guys.